I recently came across an article in Game Developer that was just so soul destroying in terms of its approach to game design and kind of the theory of making gameplay that inspired me to make today's video. We're going to talk about why, at the end of the day, feel trumps anything else when it comes to your game, and why a lot of games have it and a lot of games don't. The article that I was reading was trying to apply something called rational level design as kind of like a theory or blueprint to game dev. I'll include a link to it down below. I can only make it through halfway through it because I just couldn't really stand what was going on in it. The issue, or kind of the MO of the piece, was this idea that is there a way to quantify gameplay? As in, is there that magic checklist that if I do these mechanics in this exact order, if I follow this exact way, I will maximize player engagement and make that perfect 10 out of 10 game? And the article tend to think so. But reading through what they're trying to do or they're trying to apply, this sounds like it would lead to creating one of the most boring experiences imaginable. It reminds me a lot of when I saw footage of someone trying to make an AI-generated platformer game, and they were showing, oh, you can have the background be a forest, or you have the background be a spooky graveyard, but all the platforms are the same height, it's the same environment, and it looks absolutely boring to play. And when I was talking to some other people in the industry about it, they were mentioning that this sounds a lot like what they're trying to do, what is being applied to in the AAA level. This idea of mitigating as much risk and uncertainty as possible with your game. So if I designed a platform and it will have exactly 8 levels, each level will be between 2 and 3 minutes long, featuring one environmental hazard, one enemy, and it'll have platforms exactly this height distance between them, and I will make this so laser focused that it must be objectively good, right? And somewhere a game designer just had a heart attack as I said that. And this gets at one of the things that we've talked a lot about, but we can put it more into words here. That the feel of a game is not something that you can just throw numbers into a computer and let it pump out that amazing 10 out of 10 title. If we look in the past few years alone, some of the games that have blown up, stuff like, Buckshot Roulette, Balatro, Vampire Survivors, and again, many, many more titles, these are not kind of like these perfectly defined games. Again, there is no way in heck that a AAA studio would ever think about making a game like Buckshot Roulette, or making something like a Darkest Dungeon, or a FTL, and so on. And these games, again, have these rough edges to them as part of their design. That it's about eliciting a specific response, or that specific feel out of these games that you can't get anywhere else. And I'll come back to that point in a few minutes. So, to bring this to what I've been playing with my IGF judging, and if you have a game in the IGF, there's a good chance that I am examining it very closely right now. And of the games that I'm playing a lot of okay games. Are they bad games that should be shunned and thrown to the fires? No. But are they good games? Are they memorable games? Are there games that are going to stick with me after I'm done playing them? No. And this is, I think, one of the more bitter pills for a lot of developers to swallow. That you can't just take something that you saw in another game and think, well, it worked for them, I'm going to put it into my game, and surely my game will do as well, or even better. Stop me if you've seen this before. An open world game that features collecting lots of consumable bits of plants and bolts and ribbons and shirts and anything else you can imagine. And the player has to stop every single time to pick them up. And it's not just an automatic pickup, it's got to be a very slow one. They have to bend down and pick it up. and there's consumables like every 10 to 15 feet. So if you want to maximize it, you have to stop every 10 to 15 feet and do it again and again and again. And it's probably because someone on that team played something like Red Dead Redemption 2, and that game sold really well, so it must work for my game. Or how we need to have a consumable crafting system, even if our game doesn't focus on combat or anything that would actually require it, because it worked so well in something like Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. And as you're probably figuring out by now, no, it doesn't work that way. Just taking elements that you saw from someone else and trying to apply them to your game, or trying to take a AAA experience and bring it to the indie level doesn't work like that. Because you can't apply the thing about AAA games is that they have polish. They have lots and lots of money to throw at a game to perfectly render blades of grass or hair on someone's face or wrinkles and all that. You probably don't have that as an indie developer. Again, for the indie developers watching this, let me know how many millions you can throw into your indie game down below. But it doesn't stop people from trying to do this. And what ends up happening is they lead to these games that just, they feel okay. Nothing bad about them, but at the end of the day, they're just like, you play them, and then you forget about them, and they just cease to exist in the public eye. So, I've played games from developers that I have not covered here on the channel because they just did not get to the level of me wanting to cover them. I remember this one game. This was from a developer that was formed from kind of people from the AAA space. And they either came from Halo or Call of Duty. They had collectively 15 to 20 years of experience making first-person shooters. And for those of you watching this, I'm sure if we talk about Call of Duty or Halo numbers, you would probably kill for 5% of those sales for your game. So you would think that with that background, they could make this amazing, super impressive first-person shooter. Well, no. I played it, and within about 3 minutes, I turned it off out of just annoyance. That I picked up their gun in the game. I went to shoot an enemy, and it sounded like this. And that was it. I believe that's a sin that sends you to FPS hell if you have that kind of impact in your game. It's like no one on that team ever heard the term gunplay before. And you see, this gets at one of the things that we've been kind of learning over the last 5 to 7 years, is that if we were talking about the game industry circa 1990, 2000s, again, the general idea was that you would go into AAA and you would learn how to make those amazing games. What we're kind of seeing is the opposite. Having a AAA background is not this golden ticket anymore to then turn around and making that amazing indie game or that never before seen title that's going to wow everyone. They'll fall in love with it. If all you're learning in the AAA space is refinement and not really understanding why these things are in your game, you're going to end up with a very cookie cutter title that, yes, it's a first person shooter, or it's a platformer, or it's an adventure game. But is it going to reach the heights of, say, a Shovel Knight, Unavowed? Pick any other title that we've played that has, again, done something that's gone above and beyond. And this kind of gets why I brought the IGF judging again. That a lot of people, when they watch my reviews, I've gotten comments saying, why aren't you more judgmental on these games? Because when I'm reviewing games for this site, for YouTube and for Game Wisdom, I approach it from whether or not the design they employed worked or not, and if there is a consumer base for it. And it's why a lot of my reviews in that respect are generally, I would say, above neutral to maybe somewhat positive. However, when I'm doing judging for IGF, or when I'm judging games for my own personal Game of the Year list, that's when the Freddy Krueger claws come out, and I will rip apart a game into tiny, tiny little pieces and then spread them all over the place. Because now I'm looking at games from whether or not it wowed me, that it went above and beyond. Think about it as having a 5-star chef reviewing your meal. Yes, someone who doesn't understand, fine dining or just eats at like basic diner and stuff, they may like your food. But if you want to impress someone who has tasted everything, or in my case, played everything, you have to do more than that. And this is where, again, just okay games don't apply. This is where I will critique every little aspect of your game. Your jump fell about a half-second delayed? Deduction. You didn't put a volume slider in your title? Then you better start running. Because now you have to impress someone like me. And that, my friends, is a lot harder to do. I don't know, maybe people will want to see like a judging session where I start ripping apart a game in terms of how I feel about it. And it is really, I think, cathartic to be able to just sit back and say, this is no longer about the consumer. This is no longer about you watching this. This is about me. Did I enjoy this game? Did I honestly and truly loved this title? And for a lot of the games that I played, and probably a lot of games that we've covered here on the channel, a lot of them, no. They were okay games, but they weren't amazing games. They weren't games that I would come back to and play again and again or return to. And yes, that can be a very bitter pill to swallow, but it's one that needs to be said. And again, this is why you can't design games by committee. You can't create this checklist that will create the ultimate shooter, the ultimate platformer, the ultimate whatever. Like, imagine like someone trying to build a game like this. Okay, this playtesting session, Kathy feels that your game doesn't have too many colors, so let's redo all the assets in neon pink. Oh, but now Greg thinks it's too bright. Let's add some more gray and just change all the art around. Somewhere, an artist or art director just jumped off a building after I said that. There has to be a through line of your game. Why should someone care about your game? And again, you can't just sit there and say, well, I'm just going to make another Vampire Survivors, or I'm going to make another Portal-like, or I'm just going to copy Grand Theft Auto. People like those games, so they must like my game. And again, I think I just drove a lot of people to depression with that one. There has to be something unique. You have to be able to provide a unique and different spin that's going to get someone to play your game. Just saying my game is like Half-Life or my game is just like Mario is never going to do enough. This is not how you build a development studio over it. And this is why, again, that some of the more surprising, some of the games that I praise the most have come from relatively new people in the space. I have played games from a first-time developer. I've played games from students that feel head and shoulders above games from major companies and major names or leads. Because they're doing something different. They understand the assignment. That if I'm trying to make a platformer, how do I make jumping feel either really great or really different? If I'm making a shooter, how do I make that gunplay work? How do I do something that is not going to be directly compared to Doom? And speaking of, as I said in my design video about FPSs, if you are making a shooter right now, and your shooter is not equal to E1M1 in terms of its feel from Doom, you don't have a shooter. You don't have a product that people are going to want to play. Because if you cannot compete with a game that is, I believe now, like 23, 24 years old, how are you supposed to sell that to people? And again, this is why you need to be able to study and analyze games beyond just that objectiveness of, okay, this game has exactly 5 levels, 10 enemies, 3 hazards. So if I repeat that, my game will be exactly the same. And you have to be able to play the good, the bad, and the indifferent examples of this. If all you do, once again, is play Mario, or all you do is play Doom, well, that's great. but you're not going to understand what makes these games bad. How can you screw up when it comes to jumping? How can you make an FPS boring? Again, you're going to have to be able to play more examples of this. So here is a question. Here we're going to do like our big question a little bit early. For those of you who are designing a game right now, I'm sure you studied some other games. You did study and research other games, didn't you? And when you're doing that study, I'm sure you played the well-known examples of that. If you're making a platformer, I'm obviously going to assume you played a Mario game, or maybe a Crash Bandicoot, or a Spyro. If you're making a first-person shooter, you must have played a Half-Life, or a Doom, or an Ultra Kill. How many of you played bad examples? How many of you played the 5 out of 10s, the 2 out of 10s, the 0 out of 10s of that example? So with platforming, how many of you played Bubsy? How many of you played the Blues Brothers? Did you even know that there was a Blues Brothers platformer game that was made? I do, because I played through that damn game all the way through while I was doing my platformer research. With all the weird jumps, confusing level design, and the game just ends just randomly at one point, and there's like no explanation why. I played through that entire game in Rocky and Bullwinkle, which destroyed me mentally. How many of you played through a game like that? How many of you played Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, or Bart vs. the Space Mutant, or any one of those other very janky platformers? Let me know in the comments down below on that point. But the reason why this matters, and in order to understand what a game does right, you have to understand when things go wrong, when it doesn't feel right to play a game. Because like I've said, and again, the main point for this video, feel trumps everything else. If you can make a game that feels legitimately great, or different, or weird, or strange, it doesn't matter how many Ks you have in your graphics engine, how much Unreal and HDR and ray tracing, you have something impressive. If you look at something like Cruelty Squad as a quintessential example of this, Cruelty Squad is a amalgamation mess of elements and design. It should not work. It could not work. And yet it attracted people with that strangeness of like some kind of strange like art house piece that you can't take your eyes off it no matter how weird it looks. And that can be enough. So you have to be able to understand, again, we've used the discussion, or we've talked a lot about the business and the art side of game dev. And you have to understand the art side. Again, this is not a business video. We'll have plenty more soul-crushing topics in the future. But if you can't make a game that resonates with people, that has its own unique stamp on it, then you're not going to be able to really grow as a developer, and more importantly, excite people about your game. Because yes, let's say you make that copycat Mario, or that copycat A Hat in Time, and people are like, yeah, it was okay. Okay, yeah, I'll play it. They're not coming back for your next game, or the game after that. And I'm still waiting for my MagWest presentation to come up on their channel. I may just have to, broadcast it here on YouTube, or do my own version of it here, because it is very important to learn what I talk about in that piece. Because again, at the end of the day, you can do everything objectively right. You can cross your T's, dot your I's. You can have exactly that 8 to 10 hour, the perfect Venn diagram audience of your game. And if people play that for 2 minutes and just have a look of disgust or boredom, none of that matters. You have a failed title. And it may not be a failure today. It could still sell reasonably well. But again, if 80% of the people who bought your game stopped playing before they finished the tutorial, which I just drove another stake through a wall of hearts with that one, then you don't have a next game. You do not have an audience for your next title. And it's why when we look at successes lately, Again, developers like Nubla Interactive, Strange Scaffold, Kidfox, and so on, they have a very specific audience, but they're also trying to build themselves as a brand. They want you to look at a game that is published by them or is developed by them and go, I want to play that game. I don't know what it is. I don't know anything more about it. It's from these studios. I know their pedigree. I know their background. I want to check that out. And getting to that point, being a developer who can create a response like that with their titles, no matter how small, big, weird, strange, whatever, it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of understanding about game design. This is not the stuff that you can go to a college for or have a mentor kind of tell you. It's stuff you have to learn on your own. Someone can teach you the points of how to analyze things, yes, but you need to be able to, again, understand that difference between jumping in Mario versus jumping in Ori versus shooting in Doom versus shooting in Dishonored, and so on. Because if you can't understand that, if you're only looking at games at the most highest of the high level, you're not going to figure out how the developer got to those points. Because as our final point, we all know that making the perfect FPS space sim, 4X grand strategy platformer, first person, third person, second person shooter, real-time turn-based, XCOM, visual novel dating, cooking, racing game is out there. Someone will, I'm sure, has made that by now. Let me know if you figure out that combination down below. But at the end of the day, if you want to be able to think outside the box and break that box wide open, you still need to understand how that box was constructed, why they made it like this. Because just because you have this out there idea that, what if I make a shooter where every time I shoot in the game blue screens of death? It sounds exciting, it sounds original, but I wonder why no one's made that one yet. So, thank you for watching our design rant for today. Again, answer that question I posed earlier, and I will see everyone in the next video. Thanks for watching, and a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you enjoyed the video, do the YouTubing stuff, be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and you're interested in more in my thoughts on design, check out my game design books.